Really quickly here, just want to revisit context before we hit into some of the complex history, okay? In this section as well, on Tuesday, I'll show like a quick video, a crash course history video on the Mughal Empire. And just because I think it does a fairly good job, there's some problematic, like, just from its time, I think it makes like an ableist joke at one point, but for the most part, it does a pretty good job at explaining the impacts of that empire, and is very useful when it comes to colonial understandings of what's happening to, I guess, to India and colonization. So we'll look at that. I'm also going to put up a video after Tuesday's class. That's like a quick 5-minute video for anyone that wants to watch about kind of the creation of East and West Pakistan, that then becomes Pakistan and Bangladesh, because your book kind of touches on it, but it doesn't really go into great detail. So for anyone that wants to look at that, but I will warn you that the especially the TEDx video, there's like some content warnings in there, because it's a pretty hefty topic when it comes to violence, religious and political violence. Even though it's a short video, there's some sexual assault sort of material in there. It touches on that. And yeah, so it's a pretty heavy topic. So please take care of yourself. It's not mandatory. I've included it in the slideshow as well. And I'm not going to show that India, Pakistan, Bangladesh TEDx video in class, because it is quite heavy. So take care of yourself. Only watch it if you kind of want to. You're more than welcome to write about it on your test if that's a historical event you want to tackle. So I want to give you that information. But again, like, don't watch it if you're not in a place to kind of absorb that information right now. And I will touch on it in like very briefly, kind of in the same sort of manner as your text does in class. But for anyone that kind of wants a little bit more of that info, the TEDx video does a good job. So yeah, there's going to be a few little interactive elements next class. So that being said, to kind of like set us up here, I want to do a little bit of the earliest history, and we've already tackled Muhammad's life. We've already tackled kind of the first Muslim community, but I just want to revisit kind of this context before we jump into the history of the companions of the prophets. So real briefly, right, as we saw in the story of Muhammad, Islam arose in a region of the west central side of the Arabian Peninsula, primarily in the two main populated areas, which were Mecca and Yathrib, which is later Medina, right? And Medina is about 250 miles north of Mecca, okay? So the reminder that Mecca, right, lays near a bunch of major trade routes that connect Africa, the Mediterranean, Central Asia, and the Arabian Peninsula, so it's a pretty important area. And because it's a popular trade route, war sometimes disrupted or altered these routes, and this happened in the 500s and 600s, especially when the Eastern Roman Empire, who's Christian at the time, also known as the Byzantine Empire, and the Persian and thus Zoroastrian Sasanian Empire kind of clash, right? So there's a degree of disruption in the area when Islam is formed because of its location. And some Arabs gained from this disruption, right? As is true of all war, but others lost. And the Quraysh tribe, so this is the tribe that Muhammad is born into, is the chief group in the area. And the Umayyad clan, who is part of the Quraysh tribe, actually becomes like pretty important, right? They become the Umayyad Empire, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit, and I'll expand on it next day in our next class. Because of the unrest, however, in the area, other tribes, right, are more disadvantaged as commerce ebbed and flowed, with more disadvantages than the Quraysh, right? With warfare, and economic disparity becoming a problem. So the rich kind of stopped according for some of the obligations to protect the poor in this area, meaning that many of the poor groups and tribes lost some of the protection that had been afforded to them in the past. And so Islam arose in the midst of this economic disparity. Mecca was the main urban center of the area, and we remember too that though it didn't have an overarching authority in the area, it did hold sway, okay, as a center for caravan trade, and as we will recall, for pre-Islamic pilgrimage to the Kaaba, which had a multitude of polytheistic idols in it prior to Islam and prior to when we heard about Muhammad, right, going to Mecca. After a number of wars, right, with the Meccans, and finally they concede and they accept Islam. And when that happens, he goes and he cleanses out the Kaaba of all of the idols, right, and makes it monotheistic. It makes it important for God in Islamic understanding of God. So we'll skip over Muhammad's life because we've already touched on it, right? And we've covered it prior to delving into the beliefs and practices, and then we'll pick up right now after Muhammad's death in about 632 CE, okay? So this brings us to the history of the companions of the Prophet. So Muhammad appears not to have named a successor in leading the Muslim community before he dies. And because of this, a dispute arises between the followers of Islam that has persisted to this day, and we've touched on this in practices because, again, it's the source of the main division between Sunnis and Shiites, okay? So this dispute, right, centers on whether Islam should be led by a close relative of Muhammad or by an early convert to Islam, someone who is close to Muhammad, not necessarily a family member, right? But it can be, and in the early years it definitely is. And so these early converts to Islam who are close to the Prophet, right, they are called companions of the Prophet. The companions of the Prophet were supported by the main community to become successors, okay, and this is kind of the Sunni perspective, and who, right, so these came to be known as the Sunni, and they chose to elect a pious member to leadership. Again, the smaller group, right, known as the Shiites, insisted that leadership must run through Muhammad's family. Muhammad had no surviving son, and so the matter of succession through his family line was a bit more difficult. But those who argued for the succession were satisfied with Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, and he becomes the fourth caliph, as we will see. He had married Muhammad's daughter, Fatima, and some say that Fatima is Muhammad's favorite daughter. Okay, so the Shiites also developed the view that every valid caliph, the Shiites, right, the equivalent of caliph to some extent, the Shiites called imams, but remember the caliphs don't have the same, Sunnis don't see the caliphs of having the same authority as the imams, okay? Would be empowered with the same spirit that had empowered Muhammad, and so could speak authoritatively to new situations as they arose, okay? So again, when the Shiites, just to clarify, because I feel like I butchered that a little bit, when the Shiites developed their view of the valid caliph, they call them imams, and these imams are seen to be empowered with the same spirit that had empowered Muhammad, and so could speak authoritatively to new situations as they arose. And this isn't true of how Sunnis see caliphs, which don't have this sort of the same sort of authority. So the upholder of the tradition in Sunni Islam, so the caliph again, he has no power to innovate, right? Like he's kind of an administrative leader, a little bit of a religious leader. Maybe he leads prayer at the mosque, these sorts of things, but not in the same sort of way. So another problem that arises from this kind of like division, and some may see this as a problem, right? Some may see them as the right ways, depending on which division, right, you're part of, is that the leadership would be in the hands of people who were from Mecca and from the Quraysh tribe, which kind of cuts out all of those people from Medina, okay, who had graciously welcomed Muhammad and other early Muslim immigrants from Mecca when they were forced out. And we saw that this essentially ensures the survival of the budding Islam community, right? The fact that Medina allowed them to enter and build a community there, and encouraged the creation of the early Muslim community. But if it had to be a descendant of Muhammad, then the Sunnis saw this as shutting out some viable, pious Muslims from Medina. The people of Medina were also the earliest warriors, right, battling against the Meccan tribes in support of Islam, and in support of Muhammad's cause, and leadership was close to them, was closed off to them, if they were following the Shiite tradition of succession, okay? So this is kind of like another impact of that split, which, it is a fine impact for some and isn't fine for others. It kind of reinforces a little bit more these divisions and how these two groups kind of see things, okay? So one of Muhammad's companions is named Abu Bakr, and he was chosen as the first caliph, who was a religious leader to some extent, like we said, as well as the administrative head of the community. Again, when we say religious leader here, it's not in the same way as Muhammad, obviously, right? Muhammad is the last prophet, and so no more revelations are being given or anything of that nature. So just making that clear here. And so Abu Bakr is also Muhammad's father-in-law, and he had the support and protection of the Quraysh tribe, who, if you remember, had recently converted to Islam after a lengthy period of resistance against Muhammad. Not everyone, but those members that remained in Mecca. And they were also still quite powerful within the region after they had converted. And they extended their power into the Islamic community they had just become a part of, especially with Abu Bakr's position, okay? But unfortunately, his reign is pretty short-lived. It's only about 2 years. He dies of natural causes. He gets sick, and much of this period is spent putting down various challenges to his leadership, including some revolts against the Bedouin or these desert dwelling groups that didn't want to pay taxes anymore after Muhammad passes away, okay? And so you'll remember that taxes are important during this period, as they're expected to help and needed to help the poor in the community, help support the buildings of mosques and schools, and these sort of social welfare initiatives, right? And so much of Abu Bakr's reign is kind of squashing these sorts of rebellions. And so Abu Bakr, after 2 years, is followed in succession by 3 other companions of the Prophet, the first of whom is Umar, who is another of Muhammad's father-in-laws, because Muhammad has more than one wife, right? And who led Muslim groups out of Arabia and kind of conquered parts of the Sassanid Empire and the Eastern Mediterranean. Most notably, he takes Egypt, and on the slides there, you'll see kind of how he expands kind of the Muslim reach there into other regions. This all happens within a decade of his reign, and then after around 10 years, he's actually murdered by a servant, okay? And he's replaced by Uthman, who's Muhammad's son-in-law, who's a member of the Umayyad clan, and who was a dominant clan group in the Quraysh tribe. The Umayyads had been the stiffest opposition to Islam prior to conversion, and they become important later because they do form an empire, okay? But some converted early despite the dissent within their clan groups and kind of become part of this early Islamic community. And Uthman's caliphate had many charges of nepotism as he selected relatives for key posts in his administration. And so this sort of idea here, this view of him in this way, results in Uthman being assassinated by a group of Egyptians, actually, and this leads to the 4th caliph, who is Ali. And again, this is the cousin and son-in-law, the Ali who marries Fatima, right? And this is the same Ali that is kind of chosen for succession among the Shiites. Some had favored Ali since the death of Muhammad as the proper claimant to lead the community, right? But others were against him. Some said he had a role in the death of Uthman, and so they don't like this. And rival claimants, therefore, came out of the woodwork to challenge him. And Ali decides one day, while preparing to battle one of these claimants, to instead submit to arbitration. And arbitration here is a form of dispute resolution, okay, that has an arbitrator or a neutral person or body to decide on how to settle the agreement, and he decides to submit to this. And because of this decision to do so, his most adamant follower, known as the Khazarites, they rebel against him. And Ali is assassinated by the Khazarites. Multiple sources write that he knew that an assassination plan was in place, okay, either, through Muhammad before he died, or because he had kind of this idea himself. And Ali is said to have been assassinated as he entered the mosque to lead morning prayer. He is struck on the head by a poisoned sword and dies 2 days later. And he requested that if he did not survive, that his assassinator be killed in retaliation. And this is accomplished by his eldest son, Hassan. His other son, Hussein, is important to Shia Islam as well. And he is massacred in what is called the Battle of Karbala by the Umayyad Caliph along with all of his troops. So that is very sad. And so all four of these companions, right, Abu Bakr, Uthman, and Ali, are from the Quraysh tribe. And these companions all ruled one by one from 632 to about 661 CE, before the formation of a hereditary dynasty known as the Umayyads, who we'll touch on next day, who ruled from 661 to 750 CE. And it was undoubtedly a turbulent period during these early years of leadership. But despite this, the Muslim armies had pretty considerable success in expanding their territory. Much of the Eastern Mediterranean and Mesopotamian areas fell under Muslim control, and scholars have multiple ideas as to why they had so much success. Okay, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids had just worn themselves out by this period by battling each other, and they had alienated some of their allies in the Arabian Peninsula. Each empire had suppressed groups of their population, each empire being the Eastern Romans and the Sassanids, okay, and so loyalties in this region, in the regions that are being occupied and are now experiencing an influx of Muslim leaders, these suppressed groups are easily stolen away, as they are already pretty disgruntled by how they were mistreated. So we can remember here that Jewish communities, right, Nestorians, Miaphysites that we studied during the Christian module were often rejected and dispelled from the Christian Empire for their stance on Christianity as being viewed as heresy, or because they are not converting, if you're Jewish, to Christianity. And so these groups really don't have alliances to any of these empires and are more than happy to convert to Islam or go under Islamic control. And many of these groups saw that their lot in life had kind of improved under Islamic rule. Okay, so we remember too that there's some pretty tolerant ideas when it comes to people of the book, so Christians and Jews, under these early empires and under these early groups, and that kind of continues to be the case more or less. So after these early leaderships under the companions of the Prophet came the Umayyad Empire, and that is where we will start next day. Thank you.